to be sharing this work with all of you, which is very fresh. We've just published the beginning of December. And so we're in a phase right now of trying to also disseminate the project and to, talk about it and give it the attention that it kind of needs at this point. Because the life of a project of forensic architecture, as you might come to see, does not end when it's published. It actually continues on, as also the issues that we're dealing with, the political situations are also ongoing. So thank you a lot for giving this project this platform. I really also like that we are participating in this program that you've titled I Did Not See It Coming. I think that I was trying to think about the title and actually how it's going to have a lot of resonance with the work I'm going to show you. And I hope that's going to become obvious. If it's not, we can talk about it at the end. But yeah, let me get started. I'm going to show you, we did 3 investigations for the Colombian Truth Commission. I'm going to show you the 2 bigger investigations and kind of end with a pretty long segment of one of the films. All of the films, I should say, though, are available on Forensic Architecture's website. We are in the process of putting everything into English subtitles at the moment, so you'll see that various films on the website already have the subtitles. And for those of you who do speak Spanish, all the films are already available in Spanish. So without much more introduction, let me get started. I'm going to give you guys also a brief overview of, well, I don't know how familiar this group is with Colombia, so I should probably say that Colombia is a country that has been in war for a very long time. And in 2016, the Colombian government signed a peace agreement with the FARC, which is one of the oldest guerrilla insurgencies on the continent. In fact, it's the oldest one. As a result of this peace agreement, a series of transitional justice institutions were created, one of which was the Truth Commission. And the Truth Commission approached forensic architecture almost immediately when it began in 2018 and wanted to enter into a collaboration with us. So for the commission, which actually kind of stresses more the idea of clarification rather than this idea of truth, focuses on unearthing the causes of war in kind of general trends and patterns. Thus, our collaborative investigation with them did not focus on a particular event of violence, but rather situating these events within their larger and longer historical processes that could also help to explain the war, violence, and also the organization of power in the country. So our investigations looked at 3 patterns of violence that were present and are present during the war. Those are land dispossession, forced disappearance, and violence against indigenous peoples in the Amazon. And so the mandate of the commission and their interest in unfolding patterns led to several challenges and conditions that basically mediated the conceptual making of these projects into something that was also quite different for forensic architecture. And therefore, the methods that we use, while they might be similar to other FA cases, we had to basically reinvent them for this project, given the parameters and requirements of the Truth Commission. So to summarize, we frame this work by looking at processes of violence, which requires a particular kind of engagement with temporality and historical analysis, which meant that we kind of approached all 3 investigations actually in terms of a history of the present. And this meant that we also had to revise the way that we collected our sources and our materials, because actually a lot of the sources that FA usually uses in their cases were not available. So as a lot of you might know, forensic architecture normally relies on pretty extensive audio-visual materials, which in all three of the cases that we worked on were primarily difficult to find, and in some situations completely non-existent, basically. So this was because of a number of factors, and some of which I will get into in this presentation. But also these particular modes of recording sound and image were just not present in these cases. So we approached these three cases, which we've kind of grouped together in the title of the exhibition that is now housing all three of these investigations in Bogotá, called Traces of Disappearance, assuming this idea of the lack of data and the impossibility of access or the inherent instability of the data itself. So this also meant that our methodology was basically formed around this idea of the lack of information, and this will lead me to talk about our first case that I want to show you, which is called The Black Boxes of Enforced Disappearance. This case is about the siege on the Palace of Justice, which Julia was pointing out is a case that happened in 1985, when a guerrilla group named the M19 stormed the country's Palace of Justice, which is located in the center of Bogotá, and basically held its staff and visitors hostage. And then the state security forces responded with a counter siege operation that lasted 2 days, and they basically destroyed the building and left close to 100 dead and a still unknown number of disappeared people. And actually the act of enforced disappearance is what we chose to focus on in this project. What is enforced disappearance? I should probably say. This is a crime that actually contains many crimes. It contains detention, torture, in most cases murder, and the destruction of evidence. This crime is a permanent crime. It's considered to be in constant execution as long as its perpetrators continue to conceal the whereabouts of the disappeared person and the facts are not clarified. So in order to approach this case conceptually, we started to work with the idea of the black box. So the black box for us are places in which information about the enforced disappearance is withdrawn. They could be spaces of detention or torture, murder, or a burial, but they could also be the archives in which information is destroyed or made unavailable. Such masking of information is the condition for the reproduction of impunity over time, and thus our investigation aimed to kind of define these contours and the shape of these black boxes and to shed some light as to what happened inside. So in that theme, just because information is publicly available does not mean that the public has access to it. We built this project entirely using an extensive archive that was gathered during legal cases, various testimonies, videos, press photography, the personal archives also of victims of the siege. However, the existence of this information does not necessarily imply the clarification of the events, which is why we basically took this information and reorganized it in order to basically examine these spaces that had been basically sustained in darkness in what we are calling the black box. So instead of focusing on what happened inside the Palace of Justice with the actual siege itself, which is something that has been very studied in Colombia, very reviewed. There's been countless legal cases around it. There's very, very contentious debate around what happened. We really wanted to shift the focus and really look at the aftermath into something that has also been fiercely denied by the military, which is the act of enforced disappearance of a group of people, which continues to grow as time goes on and more is discovered about this group of people. Originally it was said that no one was disappeared, then the group continued to grow as more information started to come about. But basically, it's a group of people that we choose to focus on in this project, which were cafeteria workers, students, visitors, guerrillas, and also judges, who were all classified as special or suspects by the military. They were then detained, brought to different military facilities across the city. They were tortured and executed, and in some cases, they were forcibly disappeared by the Colombian military.
Utilizamos nuestro modelo como dispositivo óptico con el que observamos nuevamente los videos de este evento. Estas imágenes forman parte de la memoria colectiva colombiana.
We used to, sorry, I need to lower this a little bit. This is a part without subtitles. So to do this project, we basically had to divide our methodology into two, because for part of the trajectory of these people who were caught on video leaving the Palace of Justice alive, we could rely on videographic and photographic sources to do analysis. In the second part of our analysis, we basically had no images. We had no access to any sort of visual archive. So we actually had to rely on testimonies and kind of oral memory. You guys just saw a video, right? Sorry, I'm confused. Yes, you
did.
I
saw a video.
You saw a video, and now you're also.
No, we see an image.
You see an image. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so in the image reconstruction phase, which is what I'm going to predominantly show you in this presentation, we first began with an intensive period of the collection of the footage that was taken by news media during the event. This involved approaching state archives, institutions, a wide variety of news outlets, the Attorney General of Colombia, individual journalists who came forward and gave us images that they had collected over the years. This was a very complex and long process. This is also due to the forms of repression that actually the information experienced after it was shot, after it left the hands of the cameramen. This material was confiscated by the military. Often it was destroyed or damaged. In some cases, it was hidden. So we actually spent a lot of time in this phase of collection. But once we did obtain, we obtained about almost 50 hours of footage. We then began to catalog and analyze it for indicators of time. This is a technique that has been done before in FA called synchronization, where you take a series of media that could be videos or photographs, and you basically put them along a timeline. So we did that along the 2-day siege. So this is an example of a piece of footage that we used. In this piece of footage in particular, it's showing violence against a particular journalist which you can see a lot of during the event. So we then, when we had all this footage, we had to then identify each camera that it came from. This again was extremely difficult because of the process I just described, because the process of violence against this particular form of evidence was so extreme. Actually finding who shot and what news outlet shot a particular image was very complicated. But this was important for us because we wanted to understand the trajectory that each piece of footage took after it left the hands of the cameraman. And why this is so important is because this footage was often the key to the identification of a disappeared person in the case itself. So this footage was all taken during the event. It was shown on Colombian television during the siege, actually, and then in the days after in news. However, these videos were only entered into evidence of the case of enforced disappearance 20 years later. So even considering that period of time, that 20 years of silence and repression of the fact that these people were caught on video leaving also gives you an idea into like the levels of impunity sustained in this case. So these are the cameras that we arranged to catch a very particular moment in which 7 of the disappeared people emerged from the palace. We then positioned each of these cameras in our 3D model. We built our 3D model predominantly using old photographs and plans of the Palace of Justice because the actual palace doesn't exist anymore. It was burned during the siege, so the building itself is no longer there. The plaza, which is around it, is of course still there. So we were able to compare and contrast also in order to get an accurate 3D model. And with this, dual kind of analysis of the arrangement of these materials in time and space, we were then able to categorize the police, military, and intelligence units present during the siege and how they basically formed a very intricate counterinsurgency network that was in charge of the management of hostages as they emerged from the palace, and how they were then classified into either civilians or suspects after they emerged. So this is an example of a photograph that we took of a bunch of soldiers and police standing at the doorway of the entrance, and then how we translated it into 3D. This is the 3D classification. We color coded all the different units we could see in the photograph. We then did the same thing. We also classified, the hostages and those people who were being labeled already as suspects. And of course, journalists, who you can also see in here. And also, it's worth it to say, individuals who we considered to be a kind of anomaly in this mixture of individuals present on the scene. Those individuals we kind of at first couldn't really identify what their role was, but then the more research we did, the more we understood about the network of counterintelligence that was formed. We knew that the military was using extensive networks of undercover agents or people who were also infiltrating different state institutions. So we started to notice these people in the footage that we strongly suspected to be probably these people who were collaborating with the armed forces. And we did that through kind of very extensive analysis of their behavior of certain moments. There's a particular moment in the first film where you can see an example of that analysis. So this is just showing you basically more or less the same moment in particular moment of hostage release during this event. With the two camera positions, you can see one camera capturing the militaries at the door. The next camera, who was standing right by the cathedral, captured the hostages emerging. And then we were actually able to map out, the idea was to make a kind of composite image of both the days of the siege, to understand the full formation of this kind of network of counterintelligence that was basically taking hold of the entire scene. So we categorized everything. We also categorized the vehicles present, which troops they were associated with, which units of the police they were associated with. They were ambulances. And we were then able to kind of obtain this overall picture of the transformation of the tactics of the military during the event itself, which also involved understanding the experience of the journalists who were actually responsible for capturing those images. So to do this, we also interviewed a series of journalists who were present at the time of the siege, and who could also tell us about the experience of being blocked and managed by the armed forces. So this is a technique called situated testimony. It's been used in other FA projects. I'll talk more about it in our second project that I'll show you. But in this moment of our video, this journalist named Ignacio Gomez is telling us which angles basically were not available to the camera because of where they were being pushed in the street. So, you know, again, these videos are extremely well known in Colombia. Like they've been aired countless times and featured in art pieces and documentaries and press stories. But we really wanted to understand how the actual video itself, the video as a document or as a material, could also teach us how the military was operating on the scene. So in this way, you actually see the kind of video as document methodology kind of come alive, because you can see on the first day of the siege, which is on the left-hand side here, the military was actually allowing a lot of recording, a lot of documentation to occur. So you can kind of see these cones of vision, which are represented here in white, illuminate more or less, you know, most of the scene. However, during the second day, the journalists were pushed up the street here, and they were only basically permitted to film in this particular cone, which basically left these streets here and the kind of exit routes away from the scene in the black box. So this was very important for our project to understand, because this is basically how you know, these people who are caught on video leave the frame of vision and are never seen again, and their whereabouts are still unknown. This is another representation of what you just saw. It's actually a composite of both days, looking at the position of the cameras and which areas of the Plaza and Palacio are illuminated most over these 2 days. So after the hostages left this first scene where they're caught on video, they enter into another space, which was a museum space, basically on the corner. Here, I'll show you on the plan. This is this space here. It's actually an old colonial museum, which the military appropriated for the uses of their counterintelligence tactics. So this is a space that was used for detention, it was used for interrogation, and in some cases torture. We don't have any available images of this particular moment in history inside of this space, so we did our reconstructions entirely relying on the testimonies that had been taken of the people who were detained in this space and who had obviously survived, because those who did not survive could not speak. So we mapped out the use of this space for the purposes of detention and classification, but paying particular attention to the treatment of those who were labeled as suspects and then who were subsequently executed or forcibly disappeared. From this space, we followed this group of people, still using the available testimonies, basically correlating a series of testimonies of different groups of detainees into different military installations inside of Bogotá, but we focused on into one in particular. This is called the Canton Norte, which is in the north of Bogotá. And there's one part of the Canton Norte in particular, which we basically followed the predominant group of people into, which is called the Calvary School. This is the main school of the military to train the soldiers with horses. It's also a residential, it's where barracks are and soldiers sleep. But it is also, as we found in our research, one of the main locations of the military's counterintelligence operations. So we kind of followed this group into what was called the reserved sector, where the military basically blocked off this space and coordinated its counterinsurgency operations in the city and actually in the country at large from this one very small set of buildings inside of the school, which was actually previously used for veterinary purposes of the horses. So I'll show you a little clip from how we move into this space. We were able to model this space basically using historical aerial imagery and satellite imagery. And then from this aerial and satellite imagery, we could correlate the spatial information that we were reading in the testimonies. So we kind of data mined these testimonies for their kind of spatial characteristics to basically find out where people were being taken, why they were being taken there, and how long they were being held there for. So we can really understand like how the infrastructure of the military was basically set up to sustain and conduct these crimes, specifically the crime of forced disappearance. So with that, I might move to our next project because I'm aware, we don't have a lot of time. And we can talk more about that project at the end, but I do want to give a bit of time to Oroa and land dispossession, which is the second major case we undertook with the commission. So this project is called Dispossession in the Memory of Earth. We didn't choose, but the commission wanted us to focus on a case of land dispossession in a particular area of Colombia called Urabá. Urabá is an area which is situated on the northwest of the country. This is a very this area has been used very intensively for banana industry. It's also an area with a very intense history of political violence. And it's very emblematic in Colombia's history also with its cases of land dispossession because there was such mass displacement, especially during the 1990s, and that led to extensive dispossession. However, land dispossession as a form of violence basically contains many different modalities of violence, which we kind of organized into 3 different cases, looking at 3 different the experiences of 3 different villages with dispossession in the area. So we worked with a community called Lothringer, which experienced land dispossession as a collective. They had a collective project of harvesting, of cultivation, and that piece of land was taken away from them. We worked with a community called California, which was kind of surrounded by banana monoculture and this industry, which was working also in conjunction with the paramilitaries in control of the region, displaced the community in the late 90s. And then finally, we worked with a community called Coquitos, which hasn't experienced land dispossession as of yet, but its present is continuously being defined by a precarity that is putting them into a condition of land dispossession in the future. And I'm actually going to be focusing more on Coquitos in the following minutes of this presentation. So we can kind of focus a little bit, because this case is very dense, and I encourage you guys to watch these videos. We also have a video about the issue of massacres and their role in land dispossession in the area. Coquitos also has a massacre that occurs in it in the late 80s. So yeah, those videos are available, as I said, on our website. So this project concentrates itself not only around this question of land or its accumulation or concentration in the hands of large landowners, but also takes the earth itself as a starting point for our analysis. This is also taking into consideration that the role of the environment that has been present in the war, in the Colombian War over the decades. So that is to say that the earth is not solely a backdrop on which these modalities of violence unfold, but also a mode and mechanism of violence in and of itself. So as we tell the political history of this area, we also tell its environmental history and vice versa. So we use the concept of earth memory as a method to trace the practices of dispossession over time. So the argument is that as land can be read as a form of testimony, containing the history of the armed conflict and its various transformation, this concept can also be used to read the earth as a kind of document or image, and then to treat it also as a form of evidence. So this particular concept and methodology has also been thought of by others in research architecture, by Paulo Taveras, Susan Shupley, by myself in my own work during my PhD. So we kind of wanted to use this idea to really push it into the methods that were already existing within forensic architecture. So I will go over those methods for you guys now. We have three dominant strands of our methodology. They were kind of divided into satellite and aerial photographic analysis, situated testimonies, and the development of our 3D platform using the video game software Unreal, and then a very extensive economic network analysis. So I will take you into those, some detail now. I will show you that at the end. So I'm not going to show you that right now. But to really conduct this case, we also we did a very long period of field work in the communities, and this was very important because we were able to conduct interviews, we were able to film and to document the various spaces of the farms that were under threat of dispossession or that had already been dispossessed, the coastline, and the different kinds of vegetation. We were also able to, conduct these kind of testimonies along with cartographic materials. We had cartographic workshops as well, which we also, worked with everyone, and people don't always know how to look at an aerial image. So we also were in a constant exchange of, also teaching how to read these images. And then they were teaching us also how to read the transformations that they were seeing on the earth there. So we also, we as I mentioned, we were also able to gather a lot of imagery. This is a photogrammetry of the coastline, which is experiencing very intensive erosion, an issue which you'll hear a bit about in the video I'll show you. So photogrammetry, for those of you who don't know, is the method of transforming photos into 3D space. And then, in that 3D space, you can do things, you can analyze it, like measure it, and do various things. So we were actually measuring the erosion during our own project of this coastline, which is also threatening to displace and dispossess these small farmers from their land. This is an example of balloon mapping, which we did also to contribute to the analysis of erosion. And then, so this is the aerial analysis phase. And I really have to stress that this is a massive undertaking for us, because as we are looking at a history of violence, this is, basically looking at, a time period. The first image we have, which you can see on the left here, is from 1938. We then, trace this conflict into the 1980s, when a lot of the massacres and dispossession began to occur. This is what you see on the right-hand side. We also looked closer, closer on the ground in these images, to look at the development of these spaces of agriculture, which would also become the areas of dispute and contestation in this area. So, this is an area which has extensive banana monoculture, as I was saying, but also a presence of small-scale campesinos, or peasant farmers, who are working and trying to persist in this area, growing plantains, which are very different than bananas. They have a much, they have lesser possibilities of exportation and profit. So it is very much a large industry against a very small scale industry. So we started to look for ways that you can also trace the transformation of this zone for the purposes of large-scale banana culture, which involved, looking at the development of infrastructure in the earth. Here you're seeing the development of canal system in a small-scale plot, and we then did that on a regional scale. So this is zooming out quite significantly, but tracing all the canal system and waterway system in the region, and how tracing this system can also basically teach us about the property that you're seeing on the ground, and who is basically controlling the earth itself. We didn't just analyze canals only, although it did take a long time. We also looked at the vegetation, and different forms of vegetation in the area with satellite analysis, which we conducted with 3 remote sensing scientists in Colombia. And this analysis basically complemented our own aerial historical analysis, and also complemented the testimonies and experiences of the farmers. So this is an image of a situated testimony taking place. As I mentioned before, situated testimony is a pretty, it's a very used technique in FA, where it's present in a lot of our cases. But for for this case in particular, we really had to reinvent it to deal with the particularities of Earth memory and to basically trace processes of violence instead of events of violence. So in the past, in situated testimony in FA, you might have looked at an incident of a drone attack, or there's another case where we're looking at a border crossing and the experience of violence that migrants receive from border police. But in this case, this is looking at 36 years of a very long, complex history of violence. So we basically had to rethink how you basically sit down with someone and start to reconstruct an event, an elongated event. So we basically decided to work with local farmers to trace the development of their farms, of their agricultural livelihoods, because the assertion that these spaces are the spaces of contestation also carries with it the assertion that they have the possibility of registering the forms of violence that they have experienced via the structures that they happen to take, right, or happen to, what's the word, embody. So we basically sat down and, reconstructed plots of land that were under threat. We also reconstructed the shoreline, which is also, the other structure which is under threat. It also is in the case of Coquitos, the location of a massacre that happened in 1988, and also holds the future of their own dispossession. So we focused it. Ooh, sorry, there's a cat. I'm not in my house. So cat. Sorry, scared me. So we were able to take these testimonies and basically, which we're doing in the video game software Unreal. This video game software is also used a bit by FA as a 3D platform to construct these environments, which then situated testimony takes place in. But what was so great for our project is that the ability to make different levels, which are like, normally like levels of a video game. These levels we were able to use as historical time periods. So when we sat down with a witness, we were able to navigate between the 1980s, 90s, the present day, via these different levels. So we were able to also construct these time periods with the farmers. And then after these testimonies, we, and all the amazing input that we received from the farmers, we were then able to return to the platform and, very intensely produce it, inserting all the details that also they wanted to be present, to be indicators and representations of, the ways in which dispossession occurs in their communities. And this is one of the results of a very intensive process. It contains all the elements in it: aerial analysis, it contains the situated testimony, it contains photographs from the ground. So it's really a multimedia, multi-method image that you're seeing. And this is a space of a campesino plot. This is a mixed subsistence and plantain crop. And this is an example of someone who's been able to sustain their lives in the region despite all the violence that they have experienced, but it is also a space which is under threat for future dispossession. So with that, I'm going to show you a segment of the Coquitos film, and I'm going to stop the share for a second so I can get to the video. And share it with you all.
Poquito es la vega más grande, pero era mucho más grande. Ya, punta, ya, pegaba con nada, ya. Y se unían. Y esta era tierra y de allá para allá era mar. Y el mar comió todo esto. Y como está llegando el verano, más cuando, ahorita, eso va a pegar las mareas, que eso pega y va en la tierra. Y ahí queda sin superficie y la parte, y ahí usted pisa y se va, o él mismo se cae.
Poquito se formó en 1983 como una toma de tierra. Aquí, en la zona costera de Urabá, el despojo es una forma lenta de violencia. Es cotidiana y, a veces, imperceptible. El despojo puede ser leído en la tierra misma. En este video analizamos el despojo de tierras a través de 3 ejes: la finca, el canal y la costa. Con los campesinos de Coquitos reconstruimos la tierra que se ha perdido usando el software de videojuegos Unreal. Posteriormente, revisamos imágenes históricas y satelitales para trazar sus historias en múltiples escalas. De esta manera, contamos la historia de la tierra, que también es la historia de la guerra.
Yo le digo que en esta zona no había, sino era ganado. En toda esta zona había ganado. Cuando subieron las invasiones de estas tierras, todos los dueños se fueron. Digo que el uno se murió, se mató en un avión y el otro se fue. Esto por aquí no había, por aquí no había carreteras hasta ahí, hasta aquel lado donde está la pila de tierra aquella. Hasta ahí para allá era que había carretera, para acá no había carretera. Esto era unos potreros, y cuando hubo la invasión la gente se metió, a mí me dieron mi pedazo, le conté adelante que me dieron mi pedazo de tierra, y esto no tenía nada, tenía la hierba, todo esto, lo que es la teca, Coquito, Calle Larga, la piña, adelante está la piña, todo esto era ganadería. Pero aquí no había más nada, sino ganadería. Y ya de ahí para allá son las bananeras. Entonces, que esto era poteros hasta el mar. Y ahora que se invadió todo esto, ya entonces ya la gente se metió, porque esta tierra no tenía ninguna casa de papeles, y la gente necesitaba de vivir, y esto fue invasión, se invadió, y cada quien tiene su parcela titulada, porque ya el gobierno tomó determinación de titular las tierras porque no le apareció dueño.
Y vamos a empezar con esto que llamamos testimonio situado, ¿sí? Para explicarle primero qué es testimonio situado. El testimonio situado es una cosa que es una técnica de entrevistar que es distinta, porque nos vamos siempre a enfocar en el espacio y en el tiempo, y vamos a tratar de construir la memoria suya en un lugar específico, ¿sí? Por eso es testimonio situado. Entonces siempre vamos a estar pensando en el lugar, ¿sí?, donde vayamos a estar, y en un tiempo, en un momento determinado de esa historia, de ese lugar.
lo primero que queremos hacer acá con Gilberto es explicarle pues, qué es lo que podemos hacer en este mundo, ¿no? Entonces, conforme nos vayamos acercando de la imagen satelital, fíjese cómo se va revelando como este mundo en 3D, ¿no? Y lo que tenemos acá es muy importante que sepas que todo esto lo construimos con base en el testimonio que Hanna y Ariel, quien conoces, hicieron hace un año. Hace un año estuvieron ahí contigo en Nueva Colonia, en Urabá. Pues todo eso lo fuimos transformando en 3D y colocándolo en este mundo. Y voy a ir poco a poco contándole, pues, todas las distintas modalidades o distintas cosas que podemos hacer en este espacio. Quisiera que pensáramos de esto como si fuera un lienzo sobre el cual podemos pintar. Y en vez de tener colores o tener pinturas, tenemos materiales, tenemos modelos en 3D, tenemos vegetación, como la yuca. ¿Sí se parece?
Nunca apareció, pero no es yuca.
Bueno, lo hicimos lo mejor posible, pero tenemos yuca. Mira cómo se mueve con el viento. Tenemos arroz.
Ajá, arroz. Ese se parece a arroz.
Ah, qué bueno que lo hicimos bien entonces. Y tenemos también maíz.
Maíz, también se parece al maíz.
Qué bueno. Este espacio que quedó como rectangular verde, lo tenemos separado porque ese es tu predio, Gilberto. Esto es parte de tu predio.
Sí.
Entonces, siempre tenemos presente pues tu predio para que podamos tratarlo nosotros con su detalle, ¿ok? Sí, y para corroborar, la carretera es esta, a ti te tocó esta parcela, y tú por eso elegiste poner tu casa acá.
Claro, así es.
¿Ok? Vamos para allá entonces.
Entonces, ¿qué fue lo primero que usted hizo cuando usted obtuvo su terreno?
Lo primero que yo hice es ubicarla el sitio donde iba a parar la casa, porque eso era hay unos yerbunales, hay unos pastos. Entonces, ¿qué hice? Primero trabajé, limpié y arreglé bien el terreno.
Entonces, es este pedacito. Entonces, y usted lo primero que hace es, ¿qué? ¿Limpiar?
Limpiar la parte donde voy a hacer la casa.
¿Cómo se limpia?
Por lo menos eso se chapea el monte, entonces luego se le echa, se le riega veneno. Ajá. Para que el pasto se muera.
¿Qué es chapear?
Con machete.
Con machete, entonces la punta de machete cortando.
Exactamente. Y después entonces se le riega el veneno para que se muera la hierba.
¿Cómo hace usted con el machete? ¿Así? ¿Así?
No, así.
Porque luego nos graban y yo hago aquí el ridículo así.
No, es para afuera, así, para afuera.
Así.
Porque si uno hace así, se mete el machete para encima.
Ah, claro.
Se puede dañar.
Después de hacer la casa, después de limpiar el terreno alrededor de la casa, ¿qué es lo que le sigue a la construcción de su cultivo?
Entonces, ahí comienzo yo a sembrar el cultivo de plátano.
Sí.
Sembrar el cultivo de plátano. Y yo, como le digo, yo iba sembrando por etapas. Iba sembrando, iba haciendo los canales. Iba sembrando, iba haciendo canales para que el plátano no se ahogara o no se muriera.
Entonces, usted comenzaba a sembrar plátano y hacía un canal. Plátano y canal.
¿Dónde estaban tus cultivos de pancoger y por qué decidiste colocarlos ahí?
Entre medio de las matas de plátano, no solamente, por lo menos aquí, entre dos matas de plátano, siembro una mata.
Entre el fondo y la...
Exacto, y paso 1, 2, 3 matas y siembro otra.
Okay.
O la siembro también en las orillas de los canales que donde uno echa la tierra.
Pero no acá, ¿cierto? Sino acá.
Sí, también la sembrado entre medio de las matas de plátano, pero distanciada.
Ya. Entonces, una mata de yuca acá. Y luego 3 matas más adelante, otra mata.
Otra mata y así, porque la yuca le quita la savia a la tierra. Entonces tiene que uno sembrarla así distanciada.
Sí, entonces.
Claro, entonces vamos a contar. Uno acá, contamos 1, 2.
Ya, ahí otra mata.
Aquí otra.
Y otra vez.
Ok. 1, 2 y aquí otra mata.
Otra mata, sí, señora, sí.
O sea, nomás para refrescar, recordemos que tenemos jorojó, tenemos cacao, tenemos maíz, ya nos dijiste que arroz no tenías, tenemos mango, papaya, yuca.
La papaya también nace, nacen entre plátanos, tampoco daña plátano. Bueno, ya esto para acá es plátano, esto para acá es la carretera.
Sí, esa es la carretera.
Bueno, no podemos,
Sí, esa es la carretera.
Pongamos un palo de coco aquí.
Aquí hay un palo de coco.
Bien, me voy a acercar para mostrar justo cómo quedó.
¿Tiene más sentido?
Sí, tiene más sentido, hombre. Ahí se ven los árboles, se ven los cocos. Aquí era la entrada. Llegaba hasta donde está la moto. Así. 7 metros. Tenía por aquí 5 metros. Y tenía 2 piezas. Y la cocina allá. Y la salita acá.
Después de situar los testimonios, aplicamos el conocimiento experto de los campesinos que viven en coquitos a nuestro modelo tridimensional del software Unreal. Las imágenes recogidas durante nuestro trabajo de campo y las conseguidas por teledetección nos permiten representar cada árbol, hoja, fruta y canal de la parcela. Con el software Houdini construimos un sistema parametrizado a escala de la finca y de toda la región. De este modo, recreamos el paisaje de cada uno de nuestros periodos de estudio. La construcción de una parcela campesina requiere de años de trabajo, podrían ser décadas. Cada edificio, canal, cultivo o árbol forman parte de la planificación arquitectónica que se crea en una constante e inevitable negociación con la tierra, el agua y la vegetación del lugar. En Urabá, el espacio de la finca del campesino está en disputa. Su forma y diseño son un registro de la continua violencia que amenaza el futuro de la comunidad. Por esta razón hemos trabajado con los campesinos de Coquitos para reconstruir aquello por lo que tanto han luchado, sus tierras.
I think I'm going to leave it there so we can actually have some discussion. So we can have plenty of time for discussion and questions. But like I said, if you would like to see all of this video, it is available on our website along with all of our other videos of the investigation. Start my video again.